First of all, that's bullshit. Okay, we know that.
This is a G-rated show, Tom. I'm trying to help you.
And then I'm sorry.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Monday, June 9th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, guys, kind of a quiet weekend. Not much to talk about today. But let's start with Los Angeles. Protesters clashed with police over immigration raids. President Trump deployed the National Guard. Now there's a war of words between Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bash and Governor Newsom and the Trump administration. Here's Gavin Newsom on MSNBC.
Where's your decency, Mr. President? Stop. Rescind this order. It's illegal and unconstitutional. And I said it, I'll say it again, it's immoral. You're creating the conditions that you claim you're solving, and you're not. And you're putting real people's lives at risk. This is a serious moment, and it requires serious leadership. And it's time for you to be a commander-in-chief of the United States of America. And I will have your back if you want to work in a relationship of trust and truth in the spirit of our founding fathers. But you come after poor kids, you come after families, we will do everything in our power to stand up and stand in your way.
So, Tom, what do you make of the governor's response, and what's going on?
Well, listen, for all of our listeners that are playing the Gavin Newsom drinking game, you better buckle in. It's going to be a long show. If you're driving while you're listening to this, you may want to pull over. We don't want to get anybody in trouble. Look, Democrats have it's amazing to me how they box themselves into these corners, because when Trump does something, they have to be against it. Right? They have to be against it. And so you had these ICE raids that are taking place in Los Angeles. And, Gavin Newsom's talking about 4-year-old girls and, families and whatnot. A lot of the folks, in fact, Bill Malugin from Fox reported that a lot of the folks that were picked up in these raids were criminals, gang members, sex offenders, drug offenders. These folks were convicted felons. And yet, the Mayor Bass and Gavin Newsom were saying, these protests started. They said, no, these are all peaceful protests. And, it's Trump that's causing the chaos. And if Trump had just stayed out of it, it would all be fine. And it's just, you see these pictures of these cars that are burning and Mexican flags being waved around by people in masks. And it doesn't look like things are under control. In fact, the police chief has said they're not under control. Now, Gavin Newsom says, well, that's because of Trump. And you can't blame all of this stuff on Trump. And the New York Post had a great editorial. How far would the mayor and the governor, how far would they let these protests go? How violent would they have let them get? If Trump hadn't stepped in to act and try and protect not only the agents themselves and the law enforcement officers, but the greater population of Los Angeles, many of whom are probably horrified by what they're witnessing out there.
Well, there's so much here to unravel, Andy and Tom, but let's start with this. The LAPD learned an important lesson. I think they learned it in the early 90s with the riots that followed the Rodney King verdicts. And a lot of people were killed. Koreatown was set on fire. The LAPD never really recovered its reputation. My father wrote a book about this called Official Negligence. And the lesson was, you do not let these riots get out of hand. You control them. You don't let them spread to other parts of the city, and you don't send the word goes out in the street to people who take advantage of protests or criminal gangs, the Crips, the Bloods, the gangs, that there won't be a police response. So the LAPD, I think, knows this institutionally. I don't know what Mayor Bass, who has seemed after the fires to be a little over her head as an executive, I don't know what she thinks. But Gavin Newsom and the mayor are saying that they understood and they were controlling these protests. President Trump disagreed. What he thinks he saw on TV was that they needed help. He sent the National Guard. The Democrats, the governor and the mayor, immediately pivoted and said, this is all Trump's fault for sending the National Guard, which I think strikes some people as a little backwards. A lot of the media kind of immediately adopted that. They liked that narrative. They went with that. But then the people who were being arrested are foreign nationals. They're not even American citizens. Do foreign nationals have a right to protest on American soil? One would think they have a right to protest peacefully, but at least, when you're setting cars on fire, cue in the mostly
throwing rocks and other projectiles at agents and cop cars and
at the LAPD.
Yeah. But
foreigners do not.
Just to be fair to these illegal immigrants, there are a lot of clips you see. There are people who appear to be native-born or American who are in these riots as well.
Well, okay, Andy, but I saw a dozen Mexican flags. It strikes me if you're demonstrating on behalf of you wanting to stay in Honduran flags and the obligatory Free Palestine posters, if you're protesting because you want to be you love this country so much, you want to stay here, seems to me you probably have an American flag. So, the messages were mixed from the beginning from the protesters. I'm with Tom on this. A lot of it just seemed to be basically an excuse to riot against Trump.
Well, Tom, this set off another war of words in the pundit class here in Washington, D.C. And if you look at RealClearPolitics today, you can find some of this torrent of criticism and support. Here's just two examples. Robert Reich, we are witnessing the first stages of a Trump police state. Here's Nicole Russell in USA Today. Yes, I voted for this, and I'd vote for this again. So what do you make of especially the idea that this is the beginning of the police state that people fear from Trump?
I mean, once again, it shows. Well, let me just go on my media rant here because Carl mentioned the media and the way they've been covering this.
I thought I inoculated Tom. You didn't need to say anything.
It was mostly peaceful 2.0. We saw this after the George Floyd killing, these riots. And, there's a famous clip of the CNN reporter standing in the street saying, these are mostly the buildings burning behind him. He's like, they're mostly peaceful. And that's kind of what we had going on here. The media was reporting that these are, I saw Cory Booker. This was the Democratic talking point that was repeated. These were all peaceful. And it was only when Trump got involved that he sowed chaos, and then it got really violent. And so he's creating this violence. I mean, first of all, that's bullshit. Okay. We know that
it doesn't seem to be the time sequence.
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay. This is a G-rated show, Tom. I'm trying to help you.
And then I'm sorry.
Yeah.
On my soapbox. And then you have the sort of meltdown of the media. Robert Reich is one example. David Frum was another example. Tom Nichols. I mean, basically everybody at the Atlantic had a full-blown emotional breakdown, saying this is the police state. You had the New York Times this morning editorialize, and this was I'm not making this up. This is the New York Times lead editorial this morning. Trump calling troops into Los Angeles is the real emergency. And that's the tone and flavor of the coverage here by the media. It's not that we have folks who are committing criminal acts and vandalizing and throwing rocks and other projectiles at officers. It's that Donald Trump is the real threat here. And what he's doing is, as Robert Reich said, this is a preview of him taking over when he doesn't want to leave office and blah, blah, blah. It's hard to have rational conversations with people who immediately go when something happens from 0 to 60 and, fantasize,
can I catastrophize
about the worst possible options.
Can I push back on that a little bit, Tom?
No, you may not. I'm not.
Robert Reich is an easy person to dismiss. He's a partisan. He doesn't always stick to the facts. But the New York Times is making a point here. This is the first time in 60 years that a president has sent a National Guard into a state when the governor has not requested it. And in this case, the governor asked him not to do it. I think it's certainly a legitimate issue to raise whether this is a proper use of the National Guard and whether this did escalate matters. Not so much for the rioters in the street, but escalate this very destructive war of words between the Democrats and the Trump administration. That clip that Andy played, Gavin Newsom says, I'll work with the president on this. There's no evidence that the president wanted to work with the Democratic leadership of that state. And I think the New York Times actually raises an issue that we should take seriously.
And Pete Hegseth went so far as to say that next step would be to call out the Army. I don't know if they've walked that back, but that's That's what.
You mean the Wehrmacht? Yeah.
Well,
I'm making fun of Robert Reich here, but look, that point is a serious point. I think the president should explain why he felt he needed to do this instead over the objections of the governor. I keep talking about this. I think the president would do a lot better if he'd explain sometimes to the public why he's doing what he's doing, what his thinking is.
Well, guys, Tom, you want to respond? I can see.
I think the president's thinking was that he didn't want a repeat of 1992, and Democrats couldn't be trusted to ensure that wouldn't be the case. I mean, that would be the argument from Trump's side of things, and obviously the Democratic argument is this is Trump just sort of engaging and liberating his authoritarian impulses, and he's always wanted to do this.
But that's not the argument I'm making. There's a middle ground here, which is that Trump is going too far because he doesn't have the historical grounding, or maybe doesn't think through some of these things in terms of the precedent. I'm not going into the police state argument. I think the Democrats hurt themselves when they make that argument. That doesn't mean that everything Trump does could be excused because the Democrats use the wrong argument to object to it.
No. But I'm saying, and you mentioned this, Carl, the learning of, hey, let's not have a repeat of 1992 post Rodney King, right? And I guess the argument would be Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, who were sitting there saying everything's fine. There's nothing going on. It was like, meanwhile, we're watching this stuff, video clips of this stuff coming out of Los Angeles, and it didn't look like all was fine. Yeah. And so that's when I think Trump decided to act.
All right. Well, guys,
criticize him if you want.
I'm going to talk to Susan Crabtree, our national correspondent who's in California. I'm going to talk to her a little later in the program. We'll get her perspective on this, so I look forward to that. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And little news from overseas. A vessel carrying Greta Thunberg, I guess is the right way to say it, and some humanitarian aid was intercepted by Israeli forces. Thunberg says she was kidnapped by the Israeli government, which responded by labeling the boat a Selfie yacht and deported her. Carl, this is part of an international effort called the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. What do you make of Greta, and what do you make of the Israeli response?
Well, I think Greta Thunberg is a dilettante, but I have the IDF or whoever it was in Netanyahu's government who came up with the Selfie yacht thing. Once you heard that, you couldn't not think of it. And I thought, this is really what Trumpism is. It's no coherent political philosophy. It's labeling your opponents, especially the worst among your opponents, the most performative and superficial of your opponents, with a nickname that nobody can ever unhear. So I take my hat off to the IDF or whoever thought of that. They had some aid they wanted to deliver to Gaza. It was a publicity stunt. I don't think they would deny it was publicity stunt. But, meanwhile, Israel's let in, in the last 2 weeks, tons of foodstuffs and aid. And this is an ongoing issue. It's a fight. I don't think this, is she still a teenager? Maybe she's turned 20, but I just don't think amateur diplomacy is necessarily what's called for at this moment in history when Jews are being hunted in this country and all over the Western world. And Hamas still holds people they stole. They killed some of the hostages. They let others starve to death. They returned the few they returned. They did this obscene handover. I think we should keep. I've been saying this for a year and a half now. Hamas wants to be treated. They want to be treated with respect or dignity. They want to be taken seriously. They should release those hostages tomorrow. And anybody who's willing to do things like this, but while those hostages are still being held, should be held in contempt.
Tom, what do you make of it?
Well, Greta she was a climate science expert at the age of 12, and now she's Henry Kissinger. She's conducting diplomacy around the world. She's an expert on the Middle East. I mean, what's not to admire? The idea too that she's been kidnapped. That's an interesting word to use when Carl mentions that Hamas is still holding hostages
that it kidnapped from their homes.
Yes, I mean it's her lack of self-awareness in making that statement in trying to portray herself as the victim when there are still people being held hostage is just mind-boggling. And so I understand she wanted to raise awareness, and obviously the media can never seem to get enough of this girl, and they indulge her in all of her sort of childish fantasies. And this is yet another example.
Well, it does raise, though, you know, I think it achieved part of its objective, which was to get people to sort of focus and talk about aid in Gaza. So, you know, Carl, you know,
you're on the losing end of a 2-to-1 vote there, pal.
I am just saying that yes, performative, but performative protest has a role in the world.
I agree with that, but the whole world's
that.
talking about Gaza aid. This is not, whose mind is this going to change? Who's going to say, where's the voter out there who says, you know, I've been with the Israelis on this, but if Greta Thunberg is bringing food to Gaza, maybe I've been thinking about this wrong.
Tom?
I'm trying to find it right now. There was a video on X of her flotilla, her little boat, the selfie yacht, as Carl says. It like apparently passed right by like a raft of refugees from like Senegal or something.
I'd be very hesitant to credit that, Tom. That looked to me
maybe it's not true. Maybe it's misinformation
or prank or AI or
it was almost it's almost like too good to be true, right? You got
it. But it wasn't too good to check, Tom. So let's not talk about it.
Did you check it and it's no good?
Yeah.
I'm just very skeptical.
It is a nice boat, though. It is sort of a center console, about 55-foot sailing yacht. Here. So
for our listeners who don't know, Andy's a sailor, an accomplished sailor, and he doesn't approve of the selfie yacht, maybe, but he appreciates the craftsmanship of the boat itself.
I thought it looked like a nice boat. Anyway, guys, let's talk about ABC News correspondent Terry Moran. He was suspended by the news organization after he posted on X an attack on Trump and Trump advisor Stephen Miller. He posted this at 12:06 Sunday morning. Here's part of what he said, Carl. Miller is a man who is richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. He's a world-class hater. You can see this just by looking at him, because you can see that his hatreds are his spiritual nourishment. He eats hate. Trump is a world-class hater, but his hatred is only a means to an end, and that end is his own glorification. That's his spiritual nourishment. Carl, you know, I'm always amazed that people still in this day and age send out these posts late on a Saturday night or early Sunday morning. But what do you make of the post? And should he have been suspended for it, do you think?
Well, I know Terry Moran, and we covered the White House together, and he's an extremely nice guy and a sweet guy, really, and an accomplished reporter. He is, if you've been paying attention to his media footprint in recent years, he seems to be one of these people that Trump's got under his skin. I'll put it that way. He seems to have not a necessarily objective attitude about the president. And that's a reasonable response, but you're supposed to rein it in. But I don't know that ABC had a choice here. I mean, that's not how a reporter's supposed to talk publicly. And you know, they've already settled one libel case against Trump. But you said Sunday morning, so it's 6 minutes after midnight, Andy. And what immediately came to mind was that great scene in Sideways where Miles is asked, did you get drunk and text again? Did you get drunk and dial? Because he calls his former girlfriend and harasses her. He thinks he's making sense, but he's actually he's not coming across well. And so if Terry had a couple of pops and then took to Twitter, well, he's paid a price for it. But I just don't know that ABC had any choice here.
Well, we don't know what his mindset was when he wrote that. It's a guess,
and it's a mitigating information I'm offering. I'm offering. Anyway,
Tom, what do you think? Should he have been suspended?
I think he's lucky he still has a job, to be honest. I mean, if someone in our organization had posted something like that, we'd probably fire him. I mean, it's whether he was 5 scotches deep or whatever. Like, what's great, I should say, one of the amazing things about Twitter, now X, is that it has allowed the public to see the mask slip from these journalists. They pull it down themselves, whether it's in a moment of rage or hate. They get emotional, they respond to something, and then they go take straight to X and post something. We see their true emotions. We see their true selves. And this is another example. I mean, again, he's supposed to be a straight news reporter. Donald Trump gave his first interview of his second term to ABC News, and he chose Terry Moran over George Stephanopoulos because he couldn't trust George Stephanopoulos or anybody else. So he picked Terry Moran. Remember that interview? And Terry Moran's asking him questions, and Trump's like, I don't even know who you are. Well, he obviously does know who he is. And yet here, just a couple weeks later, Terry Moran posts this thing about attacking Stephen Miller, attacking the administration, attacking Donald Trump. It is amazing how often this happens to these folks who are supposed to be objective journalists. We all know that journalists have, they have opinions, they have feelings. The whole point of journalism is you're supposed to take those things and set them aside, right? You're supposed to keep those things locked away so that you can report objectively on an event, a person, a politician. It doesn't matter. And clearly, none of our journalists seem to be able to do that because they all rush to Twitter and to X and just spill their guts. And every time it's the same thing. It's hatred toward Republicans, hatred toward Donald Trump. Terry Moran would never have said anything like that about Barack Obama or even Joe Biden. It's amazing, and it's another example. And like I said, I think he's lucky to have a job.
Yeah. I think it's amazing that this late in our history of social media, anybody would post something, like that, especially, again, we don't know why or how he did it.
But you didn't like the excuse I provided for him.
Well, I'm just saying, even if that's a contributing
Drunk
factor.
tweeting is not an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. In this day and age, it just seems to me bizarre. I have to say, when I first saw that story, I thought that maybe someone had hacked into his account.
I'm just glad he didn't use that excuse. Look, Stephen Miller has said some very ugly things about the press. He's been a lightning rod, deliberately so. He's intentionally provocative. I can see why Stephen Miller gets under the skin, bothers the people who cover this White House. I can see that, but there's a way to express yourself, and then there's a way not to express yourself. And the point Tom's making is that, I suppose my guess is that Terry's remorseful because he cares a lot about the media, and it doesn't reflect well on ABC News, and it doesn't reflect well on Terry, and it doesn't reflect well on the legacy media itself.
But Tom, is it a bad look for ABC to have suspended him after the previous problems and after pressure from the White House, because the White House came out sort of immediately afterwards and called for his for them to fire him, I guess. Does it make ABC look like they're kowtowing to the White House?
I don't think so. I mean, look, would they have done this absent pressure from the White House? Carolyn Leavitt tweeted this and said, something about wanting accountability, or will there be accountability for this? There should be accountability. You should not be a journalist and be able to go out and say, you can say whatever you want. Obviously, freedom of speech, but sometimes that freedom of speech has consequences. If you work in an organization where you're supposed to be objective and nonpartisan, and you're supposed to give, fair treatment to both sides, which is what every journalist says that's their job. Used to say, now they say there aren't two sides to every story, and we should just we shouldn't both sides things, but leave that aside. Then yes, there should be consequences for this. So I don't think ABC News. I'm sure the folks on the left are pissed at ABC, and they did have this thing where they settled, with the George Stephanopoulos suit. So it's like two strikes against them, but I think it was the right move. Again, if it had been our organization and one of our reporters had tweeted that, there would have been consequences. And like I said, it might have been the ultimate consequence.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. Just for the record, I did not tweet anything this weekend. So.
But were you drinking this weekend? That's
a loaded question. Don't answer that one.
No answer. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon, and we are joined by Susan Crabtree, national political correspondent for RCP, and the co-author of the new book on California politics, Fool's Gold, The Radicals, Con Artists, and Traitors Who Killed the California Dream and Now Threaten Us All. Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for getting that tongue twister off. A long one.
You have a piece on RCP today. It's about what you say may be the perfect line of attack on Trump by California Democrats. So tell us what you mean. What is that line of attack, and why is it, as you say, so close to being perfect?
Well, because you can't prove it. Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass are trying to say that basically Trump is the one that escalated the riots, escalated the protests into the riots that we saw on Sunday night. And basically, they're saying that he's the reason why they did it, because of the National Guard deployment. It had nothing to do with Karen Bass saying she would not stand for these ICE raids on Friday night. And they are saying now that they don't want violence, but their rhetoric early on, especially Karen Bass's, was very aggressive against the ICE raids, and people were reacting to those raids across the city on Friday. And it seemed like just, kind of small skirmishes. They did set a car on fire, a Wago car that roams around the neighborhood. It seemed like it was pretty contained, but as you know, as with all of these protests, they escalate over time. And by Sunday night, it was a full-blown riot in LA with people taking over the 101 freeway.
Yeah. Carl, what do you make of it?
Yeah. So, Susan, we talked earlier in the earlier segment about, the institutional memory of the LAPD goes back to the riots, 1992 Rodney King riots, and that the LAPD understands, or certainly should understand. You don't want these things. You don't send the message that there won't be a response. Do you think that the LAPD was executing its long held plans and doing it right, and could have quelled this without the National Guard? What's your sense there?
Well, there was a 2-hour delay. It's disputed. The LA police chief, Mr. O'Donnell, he gave a press conference last night, and he acknowledged that at first they felt like it was okay, but on Sunday night, he felt like they were overwhelmed. There were protesters, rioters, we'll call them, sending off basically chunks of sidewalk that they had hammers that had broken up, and they were pelting the CHP below that was trying to contain the freeway, the protests on the freeway, and get those protesters off the freeway. And so it had escalated. There was even, attempts to throw Molotov cocktails at those cars that were isolated, that were immobilized on the freeway. And so he himself said he felt overwhelmed, but, the National Guard wasn't called out. They did quell this thing, or it dissipated on its own as of last night. The National Guard was stationed at federal buildings and detainment centers that contained ICE and the illegal immigrants they were picking up in these raids.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's only about 300 National Guard that have actually been deployed. That you hear these bigger numbers, but it's 300 that have actually, hit the pavement. And it seems to me, Susan, the problem that the California Democrats have is if the riots if their theory of the case is that Trump is making this worse, and the riots don't get worse, then it looks like maybe Trump's activity sort of quelled the riots. If the riots do get worse, they're sort of stuck because it looks like Trump was right to come in, and Trump should come in with more. I mean, it seems like they've been outmaneuvered, I think.
Heads Trump wins, tails he wins.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right, and they were very they were touting the National Guard's deployment during the wildfires just a few months ago to contain the problems and to prevent any looting. And so it's sort of like this shift that we see, depending on what the issue is, of course. But I think it puts Gavin Newsom in a kind of a difficult box here. He's trying to move to the middle. He's trying to moderate for the 2028 election. And yet he had all of this outpouring of support for these at first protesters that became rioters. And, so he had to come out strongly against Donald Trump. This was his moment, he felt. And so, he did, but it was just this awkward dance he was doing, and a very aggressive stance too. I thought that he was, trying to have it both ways. And now, is he really siding with lawlessness? Is he, is he one of the only, why did he want lawlessness? He didn't want lawlessness with the wildfires, but he did with these riots on Sunday. So I think he's in a difficult situation, a political quandary, and he's trying to fight his way out.
Andy, Susan raised an interesting point that the Democrats, in defending the protesters, and they're defending the right to protest, but you slip into the point where you're saying that they're on the side of people who protest no matter what the cause of the protest is. And if you're rounding up illegal immigrants who have committed crimes, and the Democrats think that's fine to protest that. But some people are going to hear this, maybe a majority of Americans, is that Democrats don't want the Trump administration to enforce the law. And I guess that's the dilemma for the Democrats.
Yeah. I mean, Susan, what do you make of also this sort of line? Now, I guess I should say, to back it up, Trump and Newsom had a long conversation, I think, on Friday night, 40 minutes or something, at least according to the reports. But Newsom comes out and says, if you want to arrest somebody, arrest me. This sort of rhetoric, very tough guy sort of stuff. You guys know that state so much better than I do, but it doesn't seem convincing coming from him. He just doesn't look like the kind of guy who can do that. Whereas, like, you look at Tom Homan seems like the kind of guy who you wouldn't want to get in a bar fight with him. But I would think, your chances were pretty good if you got a little slap down with the governor.
I don't know.
Gavin Newsom
Go ahead, Susan. You do it first.
He doesn't want to get his, you can't get his hair messed up, Governor hair gel. But, it is, he does like to engage in these Twitter fights, these X.com fights. And really what's at heart of the issue here is the sanctuary city policies. The California never wanted to follow federal law. So he's trying to, now they're being forced to. The Trump administration is found a way to go ahead and get these warrants for these individuals and search them out in communities. And, Gavin Newsom and the rest of the Democrats, they've supported these sanctuary law policies for decades. So he's in a quandary right now. He knows that 80% of the country supports going after criminal illegal immigrants. And a lot of a majority of the country, 54%, supports deporting these criminals. So, it's less so in blue state California, but it's still pretty strong even in the Latino community, getting rid of criminals. So
Susan, real quick,
trying to have it both ways.
Real quick question. This got some attention here in Washington. Did people in California notice how many of these demonstrators were carrying Mexican flags, not American flags, Mexican flags? Did the media there notice that? Because that's about as counterproductive, it seems to me, as you could possibly be.
Exactly. They're not only Mexican flags, but Palestinian flags.
And Honduran flags, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really just capturing sort of.
Did the media comment on that out there? Did people notice that in California?
I was watching Fox News Live because they seem to have the most live coverage. So I probably should look and see today what's in the LA Times. But I just feel like there's the sanctuary city policies is one thing, but LA and San Francisco recently have had a history of not containing even partiers. People that get out of control, and the looting, not to mention the looting during COVID. But even in Memorial Day weekend, we had a rooftop party get so out of control that they were Molotov cocktailing police cars, and they attacked a train on the metro, which is not safe, and people don't like to ride it because it's not safe to begin with. And they were spray painting the trains and hammering the windows, and no arrests were made. So this is something that, the police said we were overwhelmed during that event. So how is the federal government supposed to trust that the police can do their jobs across California if you see this sort of lawlessness on a regular basis?
All right. Well, Susan, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Susan Crabtree. But don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Ned Ryan. He's the founder and CEO of American Majority. Ned, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be with you, Tom.
So, Ned, you had a piece which we ran on Real Clear Politics this morning, talking about the big, beautiful bill. And your argument is that the Senate should be thrilled to pass this.
That's right.
Now, I know I don't even know. I guess that's still a majority opinion among Republicans, I guess. But there is a significant faction of folks in the Senate and even around the country, even Trump supporters and MAGA folks, who are not as thrilled with this bill because it does not do enough to cut spending. So what's your argument? Why should they go ahead and pass this?
One of the things, my biggest argument that the reason they get to pass this, Tom, is just plain and simple self-preservation. This bill obviously makes the Trump tax cuts essentially permanent. If they do not do this, if a Republican majority in the House and the Senate they don't pass this bill and then send it to Trump to sign it into law, they will in fact trigger a significant tax increase. That Rush vote, head of OMB, has said not only will be upwards of a 60% tax increase, probably going to trigger a recession. And I say self-preservation because there's a little something next year called the midterms, in which I mean, you and I follow politics all the time. This is kind of what we do. It's pretty fair to say the House, at least for the next few election cycles, is going to be a coin toss. Senate, I feel better about. I think the map's actually a little more favorable to us than people thought. Obviously there's been some Democrat retirements. But if you don't pass this bill and trigger those tax increases, trigger recession, I think it's a bloodbath for Republicans next year. So Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, I really admire those guys. I think they're very serious senators. They're probably going to try and get a little bit better bill. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be something that John Thune is obviously very aware of. We get to pass this bill, make a few tweaks, get it reconciled with the House, send it to Trump, and make it permanent. And that's just the starting point, Tom. I think LA, it's kind of interesting. I started talking about some of these things on TV last week, and then obviously wrote this piece for you guys. The other big compelling reason, I think this is one of the best immigration bills we've seen maybe in our lifetime. I was making the point, we couldn't get $25 billion last time around in Trump's first term for a southern wall. This time around, we have enough funding for 701 miles of a southern border wall. It funds no less than 1 million deportations a year. I think that's a low figure, by the way. We can talk about that more later. 10,000 new ICE agents, doubles the detention facilities. And I think what we're seeing in LA right now just continue to make my argument on that front. For the $175 billion towards that border wall, towards deportations, towards bolstering ICE, I think it's something we've got to be serious about. So between the tax cuts and the border wall and immigration, I think those are the two most compelling reasons Republicans get to pass this thing.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see what's going on right now in Los Angeles, whether that ripples back and has any effect on these folks in the Senate who are looking at this bill on the Republican side pretty hard. But the spending, right? I mean, This is it, right? The deficit. Now, I know that we've had this number come out saying that the tariffs are going to save, what, $2.4 trillion or something over a 10-year period?
2.8, I think.
2.8, yeah. But you've got, again, Ron Johnson. I mean, Rand Paul's Rand Paul, right? He's going to do his thing, and everybody knows that. Exactly. But Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, these guys are, as you said, they're not in that. I don't put them in the same category. So what is it that they can do, or that, where's the wiggle room here that'll get those guys on board?
I think they're going to want to see some tweaks on a few fronts. Well, first of all, the thing I say, Tom, is I'd like people to point out where the pork is in this bill. And if you want to call increased border spending or funding for the Golden Dome or any of that stuff pork, by all means, go ahead and call it that, but just say it out loud. I'd like to know where the real issues are on the spending side. And the other thing is, too, this is reconciliation. This gives us an ability to pass this bill with simple majority. I mean, we just need 50 votes. JD can waltz in and do the tie-breaking vote. Some of these spending decisions, I think, are on the next go-around. But I would also make the point in this bill, Tom, There's 1.4 to 1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. So the people that are talking about spending, I get it. I'm fully on board with that. Now's not the time to have that conversation. It's the next time around. It's the next bill that'll go in front on the budget process. But when you look at what the CBO, who's no friend of Trump's, it's been pretty obvious they're not a friend, saying 2.8 trillion, reducing the federal deficit over the next decade, 1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. The other point I make too in this piece that I did for Real Clear, if you actually address the immigration problem, Tom, we think it's about 150 billion a year that illegal immigrants are costing this country. And in theory, and again, I say in theory, if you're able to actually deport the majority of these, you might find another trillion of savings over the next decade if you're successful in actually righting what has been a terrible wrong, a systematic, I call it invasion of this country, either through what I call suicidal empathy or actual very intentional thought through destruction of this country. So let's take the opportunity. Let's pass this bill for a whole list of reasons. And I'll go back to my previous point. If you don't pass this bill, please explain to me how you think you're going to keep the majority in next year's midterms. Yeah.
We're speaking with Ned Ryan. He's the founder and CEO of American Majority. Wrote a piece for RealClearPolitics on the big, beautiful bill, which again is sort of, I wouldn't say stuck in the Senate, but certainly getting worked out.
Yep.
I find it hard to believe because this is so much of Trump's agenda. I mean, it's basically the whole ball of wax.
It codifies it.
And I find it hard to believe that they will not be able to get enough Republicans on board in the Senate to get this thing across the finish line. But then it's probably going to have to go back to the House, right?
Right.
They've set a deadline of July 4th. That's now less than a month away.
Yeah, 3 weeks almost. Yeah, right.
You're a betting man. I don't know if you are or not, but I'm going to force you to be for this show right now. Are they going to get this done, and will they get it done by the 4th of July?
I tend to think they will. Listen, Ron Johnson and Rick Scott want to make a point. I'm sure there's going to be some negotiating and horse trading behind the scenes. They'll figure this out. But let's face it, Rick Scott is a very close ally of Donald Trump's. He's not going to be a no vote when push comes to shove. He'll try and do certain things to tweak this bill to get a better package. I think same thing with Ron Johnson. Are you going to have a few other problems? Yeah, Rand Paul's never going to be a yes, which, by the way, I'd really like to have Thomas Massie and Rand Paul have a serious, just be open about it. Are you for immigration levels at where we're at right now? Are you for mass deportations? I tend to think they're not. I tend to think that they're not really for what the America First movement is really about. We're going to set things right. There should be mass deportations. So I think they're kind of I do. Yeah, no. There's been some weird, very carefully worded tweets by Thomas Massie, especially, in which he's like, "Well, we're for deporting criminals." Well, yeah, everybody is, dude. But we're talking about, let's say it's 11 or 12 million illegals that came in under Biden, and I think that's kind of a low figure. But let's just say 11 or 12 million. In my mind, all of them get to go back home because they're importing those voters to try and get to single state, single party power. And again, it goes back to self-preservation. Any thinking Republican's going to go, we're not going to allow you to do that. Not only for the absolute, you can't have open borders, Tom, and open healthcare welfare system. At some point, it's going to implode the country financially. And the other thing too for self-preservation is, no, I'm not going to let Democrats import new voters. So yeah, I want to put Thomas Massie and Rand Paul really on the mark of how do you actually feel about this in the mass deportations? Because I think now it's basically, again, self-preservation for the country moving forward has to be done.
And so you think, let's say the Senate passes something and it's got to go to a conference. You think I think it passed. What did it pass by? One vote in the House the first time around?
Yeah, one or two. Yeah, it was close. Yeah. I mean, and the other thing.
So you think Johnson can do it again? I mean, Mike Johnson's been. We talk about this. I'm not sure he gets enough credit for what he's doing over there with his slim majority. But you think he'd be able to get it through again?
I would also argue that having been a part of some of this, taking JD and Trump make some phone calls. I think between Trump and JD really making some calls, I think you'll probably get the votes to pass whatever the version is from the Senate. You'll get it passed again. Thomas Massie will, of course, be a no. But I think you'll be able to get it through. I really do. I mean, this to me is, again, it's such common sense to me from purely a political viewpoint that I made that point in the piece. I don't think you really have many options beyond maybe a few quibbles here and there. You get to pass this bill. or you're in very serious trouble politically. And I have to tell you, Tom, like you can't understate what will actually happen, overstate what will actually happen if Democrats get back in the majority. I think they'd be sworn into the House majority and literally within a few hours impeach Trump. I'm not kidding. They would bring up articles of impeachment. They would try and put a complete roadblock on any more of his agenda actually having any real progress outside of executive orders over the next 2 years. Like this is about making sure you don't have things go sideways after the midterms. So let's be smart about this, people. Let's use our heads and just use common sense. And we'll have that conversation about spending and cutting, all of those things the next go around, which I know is the other thing that's going to be done. And the other thing too, Tom, while we're on it, now you've got me really wound up on this spending thing. Rescissions. Like right. Russ Vought and those guys at OMB are smart guys. They've been around for a long time. They're sending up a rescissions package, not big, $9 billion, whatever. Pocket rescissions. They're going to try and do this. It has to be done in the last 45 days of the fiscal year. So it's going to be like middle of August. You can't cut $1 trillion in spending, but you can cut hundreds of billions of dollars through pocket rescissions, in which Congress would have to go out of its way to overturn these rescissions being sent to them in the middle of August. Mike Johnson's not going to do that. John Thune's not going to do that. So I think you're going to have some really significant movement on the cutting front, call it second, third week of August. And I think people will be pretty pleased with that. That's when we have that conversation about some of the spending. Now is when we actually codify Trump's campaign promises. Everybody will be better for it, the Republican Party and the country writ large.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. We're absolutely going to be following it. Ned Ryan, founder and CEO of American Majority. Ned, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.